Welcome back. Today we are going to do a quick one on the ZiiGaat Horizon. So what's a little different about Horizon is that one right there. So ZiiGaat has done a lot of hybrids so far, right? I lost count of how many they actually have. This is their first one with 2 microplaners or any microplaner. So this one was kind of an exciting release, probably more so than the other ones, which were just kind of different flavors of past hybrids that, just kind of refinements on what they've been doing. This one is the different one, and it's actually really well done. But shell-wise, it's got a cool faceplate, and they always tend to change those up. But shell-wise, nozzle-wise, it's very similar to other ZiiGaats that you may already own. Cable is a black 4-core modular, so all that is nice. There's a case in there as well. But we'll kind of jump into it because what's actually, really nice about Horizon is actually the sound, not so much the case that it came with. But let's kind of revisit the past, and we'll start kind of right there, right? So the popular sets with this style configuration of a dynamic driver, balanced armatures, and microplaners, EPZ's P50, Daybreak, and then now we have Horizon. And of course there were others, but those are the 3 that sort of come to mind. And before we kind of talk about it, I'll say that they're all quite similar, and I'll get to it in a second. But if you're trying to pick out which one is the best one, I would say that my idea would be to pick one and just EQ. It's kind of why I said when you look at P50 to Daybreak, that's kind of a tuning change. It's not really a difference in drivers or anything else that was going to really affect it. It was mainly they just tuned slightly differently. Horizon is definitely tuned a little bit differently, but again, if you're just looking for ideas on EQ, those are kind of there. So we'll start kind of right at the top. What is Horizon? It's about $329. It is a single dynamic driver, 2 balanced armatures, and 2 microplaners. They call it a Tribrid IEM. So is it the best affordable microplaner Tribrid? Maybe out of these 3, maybe some other ones included too. And I'll say probably it is. It's the one that went with the less upper mids. And when we look at Horizon in the red, this is kind of dipped out a little bit. But what is more noticeable and has the biggest effect on the tuning is sort of the way they brought down that ear gain region, that upper mid. It didn't have that peakiness to it. The other ones were kind of a little bit shouty, a little bit thinner. Like you can see P50 is kind of way up there. So just bringing this down a little bit made the extension a little bit easier. It's a more seamless transition from lower treble up through upper treble. This kind of helps in the cleanliness and really how this has really good sharp imaging. But yeah, I'll say that just moving the ear gain down a little bit, this will sound less shouty and more natural vocals to some people, including myself. That's why this one kind of comes across a little bit differently. It just sounds more natural because they didn't push a whole lot of energy into the upper mids. But as I was just saying, the truth is all 3 of these sets are great platforms for EQ. The Horizon graph will make a great target if you have either of the other 2. So, and again, I'll kind of get into EQing what I did with this one. I'll say this is probably the one that I EQ less compared to the other 2. But if I only had P50, I would probably EQ it to Daybreak or Horizon. I had an EQ for Daybreak. My EQ for Daybreak probably looks pretty similar to Horizon. All 3 of these sets are really great platforms for EQ. So do take advantage of that. Don't try to buy all 3, then try to find the best one. Learn to EQ, learn what you don't like. If you own one, learn what you don't like about it and learn how to, push the mid bass up a little bit, give it a little bit more body. If you don't like a shouty ear gain, bring that down a little bit and you'll have an amazing set for the price. So yeah, that's kind of this is probably the most important part of this whole review is all 3 of these are actually very nice sets. Really nice configurations, and do take advantages of EQ. So does the name make sense? And I think it does. I've actually talked about hearing out to the horizon or hearing to the edge of your, the edge of your hearing, that kind of thing. That's what really kind of rang true with me with Horizon. And I think it's very treble extended out to the horizon of your hearing. Lowering that ear gain makes it much better, smoother treble transition from lower to upper. And at the same time, the mid-bass dip does make for a very clean, hear everything tuning. They could have put more body into it. They didn't need to dip it out that much. But the S's tend to pop out if you're into like sibilance. I think all that kind of popped out. They shouldn't have dipped that out. They should have just put some more body into it, and I think that would have been pretty done a little bit better for me anyway. But when I talk about lowering the ear gain region and kind of hearing out to kind of the edge of your hearing out to the horizon, I always think of the ear gain region kind of as a little hill that prevents you from hearing all the way out here. So if you're standing here and you're trying to like kind of see over P50, you can't quite see the horizon because they stuck some extra energy right there. But if you're standing here and looking out to the horizon and you're trying to see over horizon, you can see more of the horizon. And that's sort of the metaphor that I tend to use a lot. If you just lower this a little bit, it makes this much easier to hear. You don't need to boost it. You can kind of just carry it out straight in the way that Horizon did. It makes for a very seamless, very smooth transition from lower to upper without having this kind of extra energy here and then trying to hear that or boosting it. You know, that's kind of the way I think about it. So when I heard the name Horizon, that really wasn't what I thought of. But when I heard Horizon and kind of thought about how clear it is way out into the upper treble, that's sort of why. So I think the name actually does stick, and it's actually pretty appropriate. Is that why they named it Horizon? Probably not at all, but for me, it kind of felt that way. So is it the best ZiiGaat? And I think for now it is. I think, to be honest, this configuration, no matter the brand, as I said, all three of these are great sets for the price. This just happens to be a really, really nice version of a ZiiGaat hybrid. So for me, it's probably the best one. I would probably listen to this with EQ over Odyssey. I would probably EQ Odyssey as well, but I'm just a microplaner fan. So to be honest, you know, no matter what brand it is, I'm kind of going to like this configuration. And the bass, again, having heard a lot of ZiiGaat hybrids at this point, I think they do have a weird thing with the bass. They tend to change up the bass drivers and the tuning styles for each set. They don't really have a house bass style. And part of that comment comes from listening to Penon, and I've just been listening to Archangel. They have kind of a solid house sound of how they like the lower end to kind of fill into the mids and what they like the sub bass to sound like in the mid bass. They have a very kind of solid house sound, and ZiiGaat tends to, for every set, kind of change up that sound. And Horizon's dynamic driver is very clean, it's very bouncy, it's just what you want to pair with a balanced armature and a microplaner. Very energetic and fun, but still on the cleaner side. And I would say they went really clean on this driver, and it can handle more mid bass, more impact, will offer much more tactility and texture. And we'll kind of talk about EQing that area. But again, when I talk about like sort of my preference on hybrids, I like it to sound end to end, similar in speed and maybe transients, and it just needs to sound consistent. So if you have BAs and microplaners that sound sharper and faster, I do like the bass to sound a little bit sharper and faster, a little bit more bouncy. It doesn't get kind of bogged down or muddy. And some people like a lot of bass presence and they like that sound. For me, I like it to sound consistent. So, you know, I don't necessarily need a balanced armature speed on the dynamic driver, but it should keep up with the balanced armatures, and it should keep up with the microplaners. And that's exactly what they did on Horizon, and why it sounds kind of end to end a little bit more coherent or cohesive than some of the other sets that you may have heard. And I'll say, definitely we'll talk about EQ, more tactility and texture. The sub bass is clean as well. It's used for depth more than rumbling. Again, this level right here in the sub bass, this isn't a big rumble set. It's not necessarily a hip hop or an R&B set. What this level and this bass shelf actually gives you is depth. So it actually sound not as shallow. And again, this was really necessary because of this. They've got a lot of extension out here. They needed it to sound deeper out here, but not necessarily rise and have that big rumble that you would get on a sub bass heavy set. It just had to extend this way and extend this way. And again, this metaphor for Horizon extending in both directions, the way they did it, it really does fit. And again, did they think about all these things when they named it? Probably not at all. So the mids, two things noticeable kind of right away. It's very clean, very resolving, but it doesn't necessarily sound like BA timbre. It doesn't necessarily sound like planar timbre either. The way the ear gain was lowered and stretching out the extension just works to avoid both and really offer more upper range body, kind of the same reason that the imaging is very strong on this set. Again, what's a little bit different about Horizon, you can't really grok it from the graph, is that some of the sets, like P50 is the one that kind of comes to mind, and Daybreak a little bit more, when the upper range gets a little bit too thin, the BAs, the BA timbre, the planar timbre kind of shows through. what Horizon did and kind of the tuning that they used, the way it sounds just a little bit thicker in this upper range, lowering this down here, kind of keeping this consistent out there, just giving it a little bit more body in the upper range. That kind of, I think, worked really well as far as avoiding some of the mistakes of the previous 2 or 3 or 4, or how many other same configurations there are in there. So I think it was actually a really, really good move, the way they did it this way. And why did Horizon get so many good show impressions? I think most 300 hybrids, kind of just what I talked about, they're either too bright, too thin, or they went really too thick down here and didn't really sound as extended or as technical as they should. And I wouldn't say Horizon sounds refined like a more expensive set, but it sounds better than most of the 300 sets in transparency and clarity and imaging while not sounding too thin. It's a real wow moment. And again, this whole upper range thinness is a kind of a general problem, or some people like it, some people don't. But the sets that don't sound too thin tends to stand out. And when you get them kind of edged or end-to-end consistent the way that Horizon is, it just tends to stand out. Like, hey, this is something different. It was actually tuned really, really well. It's just different than other sets, kind of different than what had happened previously. And again, and I'll talk about this in the treble, I think the part that makes Horizon is the treble and how well executed the BA2 microplanar extension was. If you take each Tribrid, kind of these previous sets, P50 or Daybreak, or other ones that have come previously or prior to it, that's why Horizon sounds better, right? They basically listened to the other sets and said, hey, we'll improve on this one and this one and this one. We'll kind of come up with something that sounds like a refined version of what came before us. And that's what Horizon sounds like to me. But for me, it was really lowering the ear gain and stretching out the extension. That makes it sound a little bit different than the other sets that have come before it, and kind of why the name Horizon actually is kind of appropriate in this case. So for those of you who are into EQ, and I kind of talked about this little dip right here, I wouldn't say that was super necessary. It makes for a very clean sound to it. It makes for really strong imaging, but they could have just put some body. They had a ton of extension out here. They could have put a lot of body right there, and this whole thing would have sounded a little bit thicker here to match the thickness that they achieved out there, and that would have been a really nice compliment to it. But basically slide the lower mids, kind of the mid bass right there, slide that up where Daybreak is. And this is going to be a little bit hard to see because it's blue and purple. So Daybreak is in the blue. The stock version of Horizon is in the red, this lower one. So if you just slide this up kind of exactly where Daybreak was, that will give you a little bit of lower end body. It'll sound a little bit thicker. It'll have a little bit more tactility in the mid bass and the bass. It'll actually sound, a little bit more impactful. It'll give you a little bit more texture right there. Kind of a lot of the nitpicks that I talked about in the bass will be kind of not fixed, but a little bit more improved in that way. And also what I said about those S's, this thing is very, very clean, very resolving. But I do think that the S's kind of popped out to me right out of the box. It was one of the things I noticed. I'm like, this thing is so clean. You just hear everything, and you hear this whole transition of hearing everything out in the upper treble. Man, it was just kind of, you hear everything. So I would actually just say lower the 8,000. Like, that's where I tend to hear the S's more. Just poke that back just a little bit, and you can actually lower this upper range just half a dB, maybe 1 dB. But just to kind of smooth that out so it sounds a little bit more refined, a little bit more like more expensive sets. As I said, they did a really, really great job of making this sound transparent and super great imaging, but to kind of make it sound a little bit more refined without such a hard edge on the S's, just kind of lower that little bit. And as I said, of the 3 sets, this is probably the one that I would EQ the least. And, again, that's kind of why Horizon stood out, why it had so many good impressions, is it kind of got most of the things right that other people had nitpicked on the other sets, and why I said this one is probably a refinement. And they kind of looked at the other sets and said, hey, we'll just fix all these nitpicks and we'll come up with something that is better than all the previous sets. And that's kind of why we're kind of down to just poking in 2 small areas to make it kind of aligned to my preferences. But do take a look at it. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.